You've entered the gray area, the intersection of culture and technology. I'm your host, Angela Benton. So I'm here with Reginald Swift, and I was about to call you Reggie, like I know
That's
you
fine.
like that. Okay, so I guess tell us a little bit about your background and even a little bit about what you're working on now.
No, sure. So, hello everyone. My name is Reginald Swift. I'm the CEO, founder of Rubix LS. We're a research and development organization specifically focused on bridging the health outcomes between people of color and scientific innovations. So, and we do that in a number of different ways. We specifically target both merging the genetics, merging the medical device development, merging pharmaceutical, merging software, all in an effort to produce lower cost interventions for people of color, where we can make things affordable for everyone, right, and provide more of that fine-tuned therapies for people who may not be able to afford kind of the $100,000 ticket items.
For sure. So actually, guys, we're going to do another episode with Reggie because I have so much that I want to talk about. And, I want to talk about, basically DNA and how in some cases your DNA data is getting licensed and sold. So that's a whole other topic. But I really, before we even talk about that, I kind of feel like we need to talk about the different technologies that are happening right now in terms of gene editing. And so I kind of wanted to jump off with CRISPR technology, which is, I'll actually let you explain it.
Sure. So what CRISPR is a tool. Think of it as like a screwdriver or a wrench, right? You go in a hardware store, you're trying to, fix a fridge, or you're trying to fix a cabinet, right? So you need a tool to be able to help fix it, right? And you're replacing the parts at the same time. So imagine you're doing the same thing for the broken pieces of a human DNA strand. So what CRISPR is a tool to allow you to remove a gene, make some changes to it and modifications to it, and kind of insert that gene back into the DNA splice.
Right. And so this is like if there's a gene mutation or something that has caused a disease or something like that, people can use, or I guess, is it geneticists?
It could be geneticists, it could be scientists, it could be researchers.
Okay, they can use CRISPR basically to go in, literally edit your DNA so that this is not carried on. And I guess you don't have, like, I particularly got interested in this when I was diagnosed with cancer and I had to go through genetic testing. Now, it didn't run in my family at all. Like, how I got cancer was completely environmental, but it's still something that I pay attention to. And I also, I think I saw a documentary. You guys already know I only watch documentaries, first and foremost. But I saw one documentary that was in regards to biohacking, and they were using some kind of CRISPR-like technology, but it was like real weird and seedy how they were doing it. It was like in a garage or something like that. It was really weird. And then I saw another one where they were using a CRISPR-like technology to basically edit the genes of rats that were basically some kind of public hazard in New Zealand or whatever. And so they wanted to make the rats sterile. And so they basically were injecting a certain number of rats. So when they repopulated, the rats that were being repopulated were basically sterile. And this is how they were going to get rid of the rat problem. What was crazy to me about this is how this could actually be applied to humans.
I heard about your story about your cancer diagnosis. So, thank you for being so open in social media. Because I think when we hear those stories, especially from people of color, those are things that we never really hear from the doctors or the physicians, because there's always so much challenges with HIPAA and everything else to really understand how do we actually design therapies for people of color if we're so stricken by barriers.
Exactly.
So that's a really great point. So thank you for that.
Oh, no problem.
And one of the things that I wanted to speak on is grinding. Just what you were talking about with the CD garage with CRISPR technology. So a lot of things that you may see now on like Instagram is grinding. Grinding is more so do-it-yourself type of biohacking where
okay, so that's what they're calling it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like do-it-yourself type of biohacking where you're going to inject yourself with some sort of serum or some sort of, electronic or mechanical method to, interface with your body. More times than not, it is a lethal process because you can research all of the materials to see that which ones are biocompatible, the ones that could actually interface with your skin and not cause any intoxication or toxicity effects. But when you are trying to create a specific, let's just say I just saw one Instagram video about you flex your muscle and like a camera comes out of your arm, right? That is a sort of biohacking. That is kind of do yourself bio. They're trying to enhance themselves to be more like what you see on Terminator, right? Where people are sometimes doing that for fun, but in more so in health and wellness, people are also trying to increase their metabolism, right? When they're, many times people who eat meat, many of the times that the genes and the proteins from the meat will get displaced into the biological centers of the human.
For sure. This is why I'm vegan now. Right. Yeah, because my cancer was triple positive. It was positive for estrogen, progesterone, and it was HER2 positive. And so my whole thing is like, where was my body getting all these extra hormones from? So
yes, many of the times it comes from, like you said, the environment.
Yeah.
And many people are using even today's methods, they're starting to be cognizant of understanding, okay, what are their caloric intakes? Where are they actually sourcing their food from? Or where are their diets from?
Yeah.
So, it's not to say that too much of one thing is a bad thing. It's just that you have to take it in moderation. That's not to say eat meat all the time.
Right.
That's just say, take locally sourced meat from naturally grained, naturally foraged animals, but not really the ones that are processed, because processed has too much proteins or has too much injections of antibiotics in it, where people weren't built on taking any supplemental proteins that doesn't belong to their body, that doesn't belong to their biome.
Right.
So many of the times is that when they ingest something, there's no way for those proteins to go on until they get to the kidneys or liver so they can extract it. So what happens from there is that now people are understanding from that fact they'll still want to eat meat, but they're taking the sense of, okay, well, now let me take Nutrigenomics. That's another form of biohacking.
Okay, so now what is that?
So Nutrigenomics is being able to utilize nutrients and nutraceuticals like vitamins and everything else to be able to enhance their biological clock or their biome.
Yes.
So they'll be able to say, you know what, we're going to get a pure extract of vitamin A, or a pure extract of calcium, or pure extract of vitamin C, or fish eye, or fish oil, or and everything else, so they can enhance any sort of metabolistic area of their body to make it, just like a car.
Right.
You want it to operate at a specific range.
Yes.
Right? They want their body to do the same thing.
I've been guilty of that for sure. I'm like, I have so many supplements, and like I was researching, and you have to be careful with this, but melatonin, obviously because it's a hormone, but that is something that I have been really researching more because I'm a light sleeper. Right. And I will have on occasion, maybe once a quarter, a nice, good, deep sleep. But sleep is very important because your body repairs itself. That's so I'm just like alert to a lot of these things, because a lot of times we get sick because our body is run down. And so, sleep is a part of that. So I'm definitely what is it?
Nutrigenomics.
I'm into Nutrigenomics for sure.
And a lot of people are,
and
for some good reasons, because what they're trying to do is enhance or leaning out specific free radicals that are in their body.
Right.
So they may not have that predisposition to certain cancers or diseases.
Right.
They're really trying to lean out any genetic variances within their genotype.
Right.
To say, you know what, we know that we have a history of diabetes.
Right.
So we want to be able to now eat less sugar or eat more greens,
right.
Or natural sugars,
right.
from, locally sourced produce, fruits, even foods that are in the neighborhoods, and be able to say, you know what, we are going to have this type of intake at 1,800 calories a day.
Right.
So they can be able to manage that cycle.
Right.
And then manage that metabolism.
Right.
Metabolistic cycle. So many times what happens is that now, because we're in this new society where people are cognizant of their health, everybody now wants to help everyone else at the same time. So you see on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, on many of these social channels of being able to prepare yourself for, how to change your body. It's not the same thing as CRISPR or Cas9 type of technology.
It's like a lower level.
It's
way lower level.
More of a lower level.
Yeah.
But it's more focused to help health and wellness.
Right.
When we talk about CRISPR and Cas9, that's genetic. That's
now, Cas9 is what exactly?
So it is a CRISPR. It is a CRISPR associated technology. 9-strand, where it's like a augmented version of CRISPR, but just utilized for RNA variances or genetic variances. So it's you have CRISPR that could do DNA, Cas9 more RNA, and switch proteins between both strands.
Okay, so now you're gonna have to give me an education on this. I obviously know what DNA is, but what is the difference, I guess, between DNA and RNA?
So DNA is kind of your biological makeup. Like it tells you what your skin color, your eye color. RNA is to tell you how biologically you break down certain types of materials in your body. It's like the genetic code of, if you're going to get this type of cancer, or how you're going to digest this type of food, or how you're going to understand to think. Right? It's really based on those types of parameters.
So it's more like a processor.
Yeah,
like a processor.
Exactly. So think of like the computer, and you have your processor, and you have your motherboard. Your motherboard's the DNA, because it's the the structure of everything.
Right.
RNA, and RNA is the actual processor unit.
Okay, cool. So so you have kind of like the nutrigenetics piece of the biohacking thing, or grinding thing. The other thing that I saw it is people that have genetic diseases, but then it's also people that have transmitted diseases. So the one episode that I saw was actually on somebody, they were biohacking themselves, and they had AIDS. And so they were trying to cure themselves, and it was just guys, after this episode, I will try to find the link to this doc. It's crazy, but they were trying to cure it, and it had gotten cured in like a mice. They had like this laboratory set up in their garage, and the mice like were cured of it or whatever. And so they were trying it on them. They were publicizing it. The thing about it that was crazy is they were literally like doing press. And I don't even think this is legal. They were doing press around how they had this technology, and they were live streaming, the injections and everything. It was really weird. It's really weird. And so apparently there's this whole ecosystem around people who have, whether it's genetic or transmitted diseases, but they want to be cured of it, and they're taking matters basically into their own hands.
Yes. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. So I'm sure you heard Dr. Sebi.
Of course,
right? Of course, everyone has, right? Yeah. And he was teaching homeopathic ways to get rid of diseases, right? That is a version of biohacking.
Yes.
Many people didn't realize it, but it's utilizing kind of natural resources of the earth and food sources to be able to cleanse out your body.
Right.
So that is another way of biohacking.
Yes.
It's just more health and wellness.
Okay.
But he did target it more towards, we know that you have predispositions to these types of ailments. So eat these types of foods to make sure that you concentrate your body to always be aware and be able to absorb a lot of the nutrients that are coming in. Right. Now, from these communities, right, where I've seen it as well, maybe not so much on YouTube, but like on Netflix.
Yeah.
And
I think we saw the same thing then.
I think so. I think so. So, one thing I want to preface it by is that the FDA is also looking at them as well. Yeah. Right? They don't want them to make claims that this type of thing is going to be a cure, because, they will come down, and Office of Enforcement will come down and really, make, really hold them to it.
Right.
And then, there'll be fines, there'll be jail, there'll be a lot of other things that can happen. So many of those times where and we could go into the deep nature of kind of FDA and kind of really cures that are actually cures that are not. But when we see these biohacking communities that are there, many times they are challenged by the scientific community because they haven't prepared a scientific evidence-based study on a long-term residual effect of utilizing that type of source, that type of injection, that type of serum, that type of intake.
Right.
So it can prove to say, oh, well, you know what? We cured AIDS.
Right.
We cured HIV. We cured, Ebola.
Right.
We cured, all these other things that have plagued us for all time. And here's the proof. Now, the FDA is cognizant that between big pharma and medical device and everything else, they've always taken precedence because of all the lobbying and all the actions and activities that happen on DC and the Hill. I just happen to be a part of that sometimes. I try not to be in the fray too much, but I have to know what's going on so I can really direct my energy to help people of color in different communities.
Sure.
So when we direct these communities of biohacking to say, you know what, we're going to take a more homeopathic approach to discovering therapies for these types of ailments.
Right.
For diabetes, you could do a lot of ginseng, and you could do a lot of other activities to help lower your conduciveness to diabetes 1, type 1, or type 2. All right. There's a lot of activities that can happen to be put in place right now. So in the interim, your kids don't have to get predisposed to it. Your grandkids won't have to be predisposed to it.
Right.
So there are ways where I've seen these communities, they really go regimented. They are regimented in making sure that they eat certain types of starches or they eat certain types of fibers.
Right.
They eat certain types of herbs and all natural types of plants over the course of maybe a month or 2 months, maybe a year. And they have proven to say maybe some of the genetic variances or any cancerous cells does get depleted. Right. Because cancer thrives in a toxic environment inside your body. Right. So you are able to eliminate that or reduce it significantly in your body, then you can reduce the cancer cell effects that can grow in your body.
Right. So what about when, I guess, biohacking goes wrong? Because that's kind of what happened in the instance on the documentary with the guy with AIDS. But then also, I guess as we think about, there's all of these great things that we can do with, like, things that are from the earth and like herbs and foods and all of that stuff. But especially with, CRISPR like technology and how that can be applied to animals, including humans, it raises a larger question about who is actually controlling those technologies, right? And how they are getting distributed into ecosystems or societies.
Very much true. You bring up a good point. So when you hear, how do I want to say this? Because there's so much to unpack there. Yeah. Right. There's a lot of areas we can go into. So when we talk about data rights and data, just as you're doing for Streamlytics and everything else, there isn't a advocate in that space right now yet for health data. A lot of people want to have open source health data, but then it goes conflict with the HIPAA, some of the HIPAA statutes. Right. So what happens is that everything gets de-identified in kind of a virtual sense, right, where if we're going to share data, you're going to know that this is a patient who is 30 years old, African American woman, with these precursor biomarker types. But what's happening is that when biohacking goes wrong, when you, for instance, do it yourself at your house and wherever you are, and then you start actually getting side effects, right? Because you're going to get anemia most of the times, that's one of the side effects of when you biohack too hard.
Right.
Right. When you switch your body chemistry to say, you know what, I want to stop cold turkey eating meat like today. And tomorrow I'm just going to go all foraging. I'm going to go in the forest and start killing people.
Right.
Just picking up things.
Yeah.
That will, your body has to lean into, the changes, the natural changes that has to happen.
Sure.
So it's like a cold shock. It's like almost taking a cold shower for your whole body.
Right.
Right. And when many of those times that goes wrong, and then you go to the doctor and say, you know what, I am taking this home remedy approach or do it yourself. Well, many times they say, well, are you under direct supervision from a clinical professional?
Right.
Or a physician to say, proceed. We know, first of all, give us these parameters on which and why you're doing it. What's the health benefit?
Right.
What's the risk? There's a lot of evaluative factors that has to be put in place.
This is true, but even like when I was going through my diagnosis and stuff, I was my own health advocate too. I challenged, my doctors. I did a lot of stuff on my own in addition to like the chemotherapy and everything like that. And so, I do, not to take anything away from like medical professionals, but a lot of times I do feel like there's a sense of authority there, as if, they say, okay, well, this is what you should do. And no one ever challenges it. No one ever says, oh, well, why? Or, whatever else. And so, back to my earlier topic of, not to say any medical professionals would do this or anything, but when you have certain health or medical technologies that may be in the hands of, other people, not necessarily for malice, but just maybe with limited perspective, with limited viewpoints, how that can really disrupt whole ecosystems. I wanted to say economies, but I do kind of mean economies, especially when you're thinking of, Africa and like the continent and like different healthcare that gets, I guess penetrated into that community. Like I think in that same documentary we were watching, it was something around, they were protesting to not use anything that was genetically engineered to cure malaria. And that was a big thing.
Yes. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Yeah. So one of the works that we did was, and we do a lot of, stuff with the government. So we kind of can't talk about a lot of the stuff that we do.
Sure.
But one of the things that we actually did was work with Morocco and Nigeria and people of India for infectious disease. So I always like to share this fact because I think it's really critical and vital for people to understand, right? So for people to create like a malaria vaccine, there has to be respondents to be able to test against it.
Right. So
that conducts a clinical trial. Many professionals would conduct a clinical trial. Now, since 1985, there have been about 2.1 million clinical trials. I mean, we're talking about globally. Infectious disease has roughly about half or maybe a quarter of that, or third or quarter of that. Now, in all types of disease traits or disease clinical trials, or infectious disease clinical trials, there have been only 10% that have produced people of color as respondents to a clinical trial. So where about the other 90%?
Right.
And it hasn't really been tested against, well, malaria we know.
Yeah.
Because that's something for a specific direct region.
Right.
Where it has occurred time and time again. But when we're talking about other emerging threats, we don't know any data that can support, okay, how are these people going to react? How are the people in Nigeria going to react to this certain types of drug or treatment option.
Exactly.
Because we never tested against them.
Exactly. And this was part of the conversation that I had with my healthcare providers too, with the treatment that I had. I don't even know why I asked this question, but I did ask a question around, they were giving me some kind of data points around the study of the results with a certain treatment plan that I have for my cancer. And I wanted to know how many women of color, Black women specifically, and that's part of the issue. You guys can look, I did a whole podcast with the genetic company Color a few years ago during Breast Cancer Awareness Month, where we talked about, it's a very, and also we partnered with Essence when Vanessa DeLuca was the editor-in-chief, but we were talking about the issue with communities of color around trust. And, medical professionals, we can talk about Henrietta Lack. We can go in so many different directions with this. And I really just kind of wanted to leave it there. And as you guys now understand why we are breaking this podcast up into two, because we've just talked, for almost 30 minutes just about CRISPR, biohacking, genetic engineering. And this is really kind of a foundation for, the second part of this podcast, where we'll go, I guess, a little bit more into detail around data and healthcare data. But any last words on genetic engineering, genetic technologies?
Well, here's what I'll say about it. It does show promise, but we know that it's still in the lab, right? As far as genetic engineering. Biohacking and CRISPR type of identities should always be split up in two pathways. Because we have the actual foundational genetic engineering, which will affect your DNA, your RNA strands. And then you have biohacking, do-it-yourself biohacking, that will change some of the gene expressions, but the genes will stay the same, right? For DNA, it'll be different because, if you have a protein strand that is predisposed to the BRCA gene, right? You can be able to modify it and change it out.
Yeah.
Not so much for, biohacking.
Right.
You'll be able to modify it into you'll be less predisposed to it because of other factors that may happen in the body of whatever proteins that are released. Sure. But to have that foundational understanding, that's kind of critical. What people should understand.
Right.
And I'm an advocate for healthy eating.
Right.
I want to eat healthier myself. So I know sometimes I just eat too much tacos.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm cognizant of, how what I am doing plays a part of my future health, right?
Sure.
And being able to be there for the future, for my kids and my grandkids.
Well, what it's really about is taking control of your own health.
That's
really.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, and data will be able to support us if we can manage our own data or can take our own data sets. We'll be much more powerful than anybody realizes.
Absolutely. So on that note, we're going to wrap. This was The Gray Area.